What does Stoicism actually say about what you can control? And what happens when you stop trying to control everything else? Is Stoicism about wearing emotional armor or something deeper? Ethical steadiness when it counts the most. If you're looking for the answer to those questions, you're in the right place.
If I instead act cold and calculating and professional, is that not a suppressing an emotion?
Like your emotions are simply to be managed and put away, not as a director of what judgment am I missing.
The point is, being a good person is pretty badass once you know what it is.
My name's Tim Winnicke, licensed therapist and Air Force veteran. And in our 27th episode of American Masculinity, we've got William Spears coming to help answer those questions. Commander Spears is a 20-year active duty naval submarine officer and a Stoic scholar who just published his first book, Stoicism as a Warrior Philosophy. We're digging into what Stoicism actually demands, how it gets misused, and how you can use it in your life during your most critical situations to come out the other side as who you want to be. While you listen, think about this. What's somewhere where you're using emotional armor too much and awareness not enough? We'll talk more about it at the end. Let's get started. Hey, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about this.
Yeah. Hey, Tim, I'm glad to be here. Before we get going,
Sure.
I do need to say that anything I say here is just my own opinion, speaking as William C. Spears. It doesn't represent an official position of the U.S. government or Navy or anything like that. If I endorse some product or some hyperlink or something like that, it has nothing to do with the Navy's opinion. That's just me.
So I was really excited to find you because I get really tired of how Stoicism is portrayed in the world. I get a lot of guys that get kind of focused on the mix-up between being stoic and contained instead of using a philosophical discipline to be a better man in the world. And I think you're one of the better guys to talk to about this. So how are we confusing emotional containment and emotional discipline? Like, what's your take on that after all of the work you've done in Stoicism?
Okay, well, with respect to Stoicism, one thing I will say is that it's like week 2 of browsing Stoic blogs where you get your card that gives you license to just say everyone else is doing it wrong. So I try not to be that guy. I think that the only real counter to misinformation is just to put out better information rather than spending a lot of time complaining about it. And different people get different things out of it. I mean, Stoicism is going through this big explosion of popularity right now, and there are people out there that will treat it like a religion, and say like, I am a Stoic and that means I believe X, Y, Z. And if anyone doesn't believe that, then they can't be it. And then there's other people who are like, yeah, Stoicism. I watched Gladiator. I'm a Stoic, and like, I don't care. The main thing is it just people who, I think if you're missing certain components of it, and if you don't dig below the surface of it, then you're just missing a lot of value. You're leaving a lot on the table, and I'd hate for that to happen. But I don't see myself as some guardian of what Stoicism really means, and that's kind of one of the points that I make in my writings. I don't call myself a Stoic. It's easier for me to, just as a simplifying assumption, to say that part of the necessary and sufficient conditions of a Stoic is that you lived 2,000 years ago or thereabouts. And that way we don't have to quibble about what it really means. It's more of this is philosophy, and to properly engage philosophy, you need to read the ideas and say, well, I agree with that, or I don't, and do that work. And so I encourage people to do that work. To your question, containment versus discipline and emotions. I mean, containment is just saying, well, I'm not angry, whenever you actually are. I think that would be the problem versus disciplining your actions, recognizing and pointing out, man, I am emotional right now, and I am not going to do the thing that I would really like to do. I push back a little bit on, so in a lot of those week 2 people, and a lot of the online discourse around Stoicism, you've got a lot of people who will say, well, no, it's really understanding your emotions and getting in touch with your emotions, and we would never want to suppress them. And so, like, we should be clear. If we're going to say we never want to suppress our emotions, we should be clear what we're saying and what we're not saying. For example, if I'm in a business meeting and I'm giving a presentation and some jerk peer of mine wants to embarrass me and says something really embarrassing or really insulting, and I'm furious at that statement, I'm furious at this outcome, and I want to launch across the table at the guy, but I don't, is that suppressing? Is that not suppressing an emotion? If I instead act cold and calculating and professional, is that not a suppressing an emotion? You know?
Well, so this is, I think, the distinction between suppression and management, right? Discipline to
Yeah.
me is always managing. The frame that I really like to use clinically for people that seems to resonate is if we think of our life as we're trying to get somewhere, your body and behaviors is the car you're traveling in, your emotions is a compass and a gas tank, and your logical mind and reasoning is the map of the territory. And you can get places with just one. You do better with two. And if you get all three in alignment, things go really well.
Yeah, I like that map analogy. That's really good. My other example for this, you'll mention it in the intro, but I'm in the Navy. I'm a submarine officer. A lot of our job is spent in on the con or in the control room of the submarine, barking orders and saying, you know, left full rudder, steady course 210, blah 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 blah, dive, make your depth, whatever. And if I'm in that can be a very tense situation. If I'm managing contacts and trying not to get the ship run over, trying not to get detected or whatever, there can be some very intense things going on, and there can be some emotions flying. Now, that is not a time to break out into tears or to be yelling across the room. I think that is emotional management, but the difference is recognizing that there's an impression there that has made me emotional. There's some judgment underlying that impression, and trying to get at that. That's what Stoicism actually involves. The philosophy of Stoicism is identifying the underlying impression, saying that there's some judgment call leading to this emotion. And I do think that the ancient Stoics were a bit unrealistic in their degree to which that they think that people can control those judgments or necessarily isolate an emotion to a judgment. But that's the theoretical framework, and it's a very useful one. I think that they recognized that they were unrealistic in their model of the sage to some degree, but that use of an ideal wise person would view this situation like this, that is a model for what right looks like, and being able to say, well, that's what perfect would look like. How can I get closer to that is a very useful way to look at it. So
Well,
I
yeah,
hope that it's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but
well, kind of, right? I think
it's
for me, it's like a step one, step two, right? Containment is important, right? That I think one of the things the military really gave me was the idea of bearing. I can feel whatever I'm feeling, but I am effective and I am clear. And what my clinical work has taught me is it's not just not responding to the emotions in the moment. Sometimes it's leveraging the emotions to do the thing you need to do.
that might be a place where orthodox Stoicism kind of misses the mark. A good example is anger. Does not anger make you more likely or to better do this thing that you should accomplish? Does it not motivate you to do the right thing sometimes? And the Stoics would deny that. I think there's two sides of that coin. What a perfect person would look like is someone who can do that right thing without being angry. And if I am a prize fighter, do I want to be the guy that gets pissed off, or do I want to be the guy that pisses the other guy off while I remain cold and calculating and kick his ass?
Well, I think that's the trick, though. The fighter that feels disrespected, that gets cold and calculating when he's angered, means that he's angry because this person slighted him, because there's a boundary miss, because there's a judgment that tells me I don't like what this other person's doing. Like it's interesting to me to hear the Stoics weren't going to acknowledge that like your emotions are simply to be managed and put away, not as a director of what judgment am I missing? What are the things in my life that aren't the way or are the way that I like them, based on the emotional feedback I'm getting, and how do I explore those things with depth?
Don't get me wrong. They did not completely suppress all emotions, right? They believed that there were good emotions. And if you're reading translated stuff and they talk about passions are specifically, that translates to a thing that effectively means bad emotions, irrational, unruly, unjustified. Whereas eupathia, or what translates to rational emotions or good emotions, are things like joy and affection to people who are my comrades or my friends or my family. There's an emotional component to social interaction, and the Stoics definitely believed that human beings were meant for each other, and to be a functioning member of society, you gotta do your part and work with each other and interact with each other. And being a proper friend or family member has an emotional component to it. So it's not just suppression of all emotions, but it's very close to that, and it's probably closer to that than reality really kind of reflects for anyone. But I think
Yeah.
it's a very valuable way to think about things.
No, I love that. I think I think for those of us in mental health that are trying to leverage Stoicism in our practices, we're trying to reach white guys with emotional management. Like, hey, your emotions exist. Accepting they exist is going to help you a lot, rather than trying to shame them, contain them, and ignore them. Acknowledge and direct, and then act.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's some overlap there within the Stoics, but their frame isn't as much on leverage the emotion. It's acknowledge the emotions happening and do the right thing anyway.
Yeah. Now, why white guys?
So for
What's that?
me, the reason
Yeah.
why it's white guys is because I get really annoyed at cultural appropriation.
Okay.
And there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of places in the world, but I feel like we do better when our wisdom is within our cultural context.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't mean that there aren't great people that do Eastern stuff that are white and get a lot out of that. But I think the Stoic idea of awareness has a lot better reach when I'm talking to guys. Like if I get into mindfulness and I get into the mindfulness practices of the Buddhist, that gets kind of hippie. It feels a little hippie, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of guys, it just turns them off immediately. But if I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, Marcus Aurelius had this idea, and they're
Yeah.
anywhere near their 40s, they're like, oh, Rome, I know Rome. This is awesome.
Yeah. It's one of those rules. Like you turn 40, you got to get into Rome.
You're Rome in World War II, right?
Yeah.
And so it's for me, what was really nice about finding some Stoic practice and being able to bring it in is I always felt a little uncomfortable with the mindfulness practice of the ways that we use it, because out here in Colorado, we've got Boulder. It's a very, very big spiritual place for the Buddhist community. And so there's a lot of people running around claiming things that don't necessarily belong to them,
Okay.
and not do like kind of like what you're talking about with the Stoics, where there's a lot of people that read the cliff notes and say, I'm going to live by these cliff notes, don't do any depth, and then speak to it. Right.
Yeah.
I think you're a lot better off when your culture is in alignment with the wisdom you're doing that with.
Yeah, I agree. I've never been able to get into Buddhism or the Eastern philosophies. I think that they don't have the same grounding and they don't have the same tradition and rationality that the Hellenistic and Western philosophical tradition does. You know, that's not to say that they don't now, or that a modern Eastern philosopher is going to be familiar with Western philosophy just as part of education. But I can't read everything. But
Sure.
the Eastern stuff that I have read, I'm just kind of like it's too woo. It's too spiritual and not scientific enough, honestly. Not to say that the Stoics, who I resonate with a lot, didn't have their own mysticisms, but there's a rational logic to it all. And kind of the way that I've been able to articulate Stoicism quickly is to say it's an intersection point between hyper rationality and virtue ethics. And I think that's an important thing. It basically brings those two things into alignment. Is rationality and virtue ethics. It basically it's built around the idea that rationality will bring you to virtue and to ethics. If you are rational, you will be virtuous.
Yeah.
Someone who is absolutely rational will be absolutely virtuous.
Well, and I think the trick there is, I think when a lot of guys hear it, and me too, like whenever I hear rational, it always makes me think of an angry man, because what I see a lot of in my practice and what I see a lot of in my world is guys, when they get angry, they go cold and think they're rational because they're not acknowledging the anger and what's happening. And
That sounds very dangerous.
it's hugely dangerous, and it's what ends up bringing a lot of guys into my office for anger management.
Okay.
And it's because of that misattunement for what the rational description in the Stoics is. Can you tell us a little bit more about what rational means in this framework?
Yeah. Well, rationality is the exercise of reason. And for the Stoics, reason is almost a divine quality. It is what separates humans from animals, and the degree of separation is greater than the degree between animals and plants. And it is a divine faculty on a scale of life, from rocks to bacteria or whatever, plants, animals, humans, and ultimately to the entire rational universe, which they saw as synonymous with God. And the spiritual and theistic aspect is a thing that a lot of the modern Stoicism movement really seeks to paint over, like, oh no, don't say the G word because that's going to turn people off, and we'll just cut that out. And it's like, calm down. They're not talking about Jesus. This was before then. They're talking about a pantheistic concept. And if you import your own religious baggage into this, and your own beefs with religion into this, then you're the one who's bringing things into things where they don't belong.
I think that's the hard part, is that when we talk a lot about culture, there's this presumption that we don't have one.
Yeah.
And we do. And that there's a reason why, like, the brilliant minds in the Eastern philosophies don't resonate with you. It's because that's not your normal. It's not in your culture. Stoics they're more related to where you and I came up being American men, right? We're raised in a republic. And so I think
Western is as it gets, but
right.
Fish don't know they're wet.
Exactly. And so I think that's where people get really uncomfortable about how divisive religion is. But they were men of their time coming up with these ideas, with their understanding of the spiritual, with the understanding they brought. The idea that wouldn't somehow get into their ideas is, like you said, you're missing the point.
Yeah, it is missing the point. It's importing something that doesn't come from there. But what I was getting at, what got me on that point, is that reason and following that rationality is a divine quality to them. It's holy. It is the spirit of the rational universe inhered in a human being. And the individual human is a microcosm of that maximal universe, is the representation of it. And so with that comes a moral obligation to exercise reason, to use reason and think rationally. For instance, the idea that it's virtuous for me to try to believe something that I rationally don't believe, that doesn't make any sense. You should exercise your reason, and you should be truthful with yourself. And so that concept, that's an example of rationality being virtuous.
Is it reasonable to say rationality is about maintaining curiosity?
I would say that is I wouldn't say rationality is about that. I would say that is a function of rationality. Like, okay. I would say that
So it's the egg, chicken is the curiosity.
Yeah. And an intellectual humility in light of the vastness of the universe. If your denominator is infinity, if you take known over unknown and your denominator is infinity, we all approach zero in terms of what we know. And recognizing that speck that within the vastness of the universe of what current human knowledge represents puts you in a realm of intellectual humility, where you can say, man, I really know nothing. And that harkens back to Socrates, and he was cited as no one is wiser than this guy. And he's the one who's going around saying, I know, I don't know anything, but at least I know that.
Yeah, I think for the emotional processing on that end of things, a lot of guys that come in, American men were not really raised with an emotional vocabulary and understanding of what is happening with our emotional self. And so by getting guys curious and giving them language to leverage their rationality, to better use and understand their emotions, to understand that where these pulls are coming from and why their mind might all of a sudden start making up stories to justify whatever.
Yeah.
That curiosity becomes really key. And the best frame I've found for it is that they're happening all at once, right? Like we don't exist like a clock where one thing spins and then the other thing spins. Like our emotions and our rationality are always happening at the same time. It's just which one are you catching at any given point if you're paying attention.
Yeah, which one's driving behavior.
And which one you're looking at, right? It's really hard to not look at the words and language that your thoughts are using and coming up with a story and feel that tightness in your chest that lets you know that person made you angry.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think an important thing on the topic of rationality to recognize that really separates the Stoics out from how I think that they're often misinterpreted is a vital caveat is that rationality will drive you to become more virtuous. As you become wiser, as the human being becomes wiser, they will become more virtuous. And that virtue is captured in the qualities of wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. And so that kind of categorically eliminates the idea that I'm going to become this Machiavellian bastard by being more rational. I'm just going to find ways to be more cold and calculating and take advantage of people and get accrue wealth and fame and power and all that through all these terrible means. By becoming more rational, I'll come to see that all those things are petty trinkets, or they're essentially valueless to me in comparison to what really matters and what's really valuable. And I think that was a huge turning point for me growing up, kind of in my 20s when I started to explore Stoicism. Before that, there was this huge cognitive dissonance in who I wanted to be. On the one hand, I wanted to be high achieving, high performance. I want to do and achieve all these awesome things and just be this awesome, high ranking, whatever. And then over here, on the other hand, I want to be a family man and I want to be a good person and I want to be all those things that I just kind of gathered from growing up in a good family that make a good person. And I saw those things as being conflicting. But what brought them into alignment really is the recognizing that the material aspects of success and the trivial things, or things that I now think are trivial, are in fact trivial. They're nuts and figs that children scramble after.
Well, it's interesting because just the way that the podcasting works. I recorded a solo episode that's actually going to release right after this one, where I talk about masculine traits, and status seeking is one of them. And all of the masculine traits can go toxic, but the way to make sure that they're not is, let's say that you're someone that values the trappings of success because you need to be seen as successful to do the things that are in alignment with your values.
Yeah.
That's how you do that. Like, if it's important for you to be dressed a certain way, looking like you have the things you have, for people to listen for you to achieve your goals, that's very different than chasing those things because you want those things.
Yeah,
and
they can be instrumental.
Yeah, they can, but they're things at the end of the day, right? It's all about how we use them, not letting them use us.
Yeah, and importantly, they're not you. and I mean, I definitely see this in the military, and I've experienced this where you think your rank is you, and you think your office is you. That can evaporate at any moment, and due to circumstances completely outside of my power and outside of me having done anything right or wrong. My entire identity can be wrapped up in this job, and then tomorrow I can be medically disqualified, and now where am I?
Well, I got very lucky. One of my best commanders is now General Downs, and I served under him back when he was a little 05, and he said something that really helped me avoid that, and it was mostly about families. He was like, "The military is going to take care of you while you're here. At some point, you won't be here. Make sure you like who's leaving."
That's a really good point. That's an important one, and that's kind of where I'm at, and recognizing Epictetus, my favorite Stoic philosopher, said that people who misunderstand these trappings of status and as their identity are like stage actors who begin to think that their costumes and their high boots are their very selves. And it's a point of confusion, and it's a ridiculous one. How ridiculous to actually think that that's what you are.
Yeah, it's always interesting because for me, I always try to imagine the balance of things, right? So I'm sure you're really proud of the rank you achieved. I'm proud of that I made it to staff sergeant when I did, and I'm exceedingly proud of my license as a clinician, but that can go away in an instant. Yeah. Right? Like, all it takes is me making one mistake at going to a board, and then my license is gone. And so
now no one can take away all the work you did to get there.
Right. Or the knowledge that I've gotten from doing all the things that I've done for it. But the societal roles that come from the ranks and position you've achieved.
Yeah.
I think for me, I'm just trying to soften a little bit of what you say, because I want to acknowledge how important the roles we hold are to men in particular, and how, as long as you're grounded in who you are and the role you hold, instead of letting the role you hold become who you are.
So the Epictetus specifically deals with this very well, the concept of roles and how they balance out. Did you happen to get to my fourth chapter? I'm just I'm just
A little
curious.
bit, a
Or
little bit.
or did you fall asleep before that? So
Your book is very good. It's just very dense.
yeah, I don't pretend that it's not. There are better introductory works if you're not familiar with Stoicism. So the concept of role ethics is deeply embedded in Stoicism, but it's kind of below the surface a little bit. It's not really, you don't really get it in the popular takes. But the Stoics are very intense about recognizing what roles we fulfill, identifying it, and recognizing and identifying and fulfilling whatever obligations are attendant to those roles. But there is a hierarchy, and there are specific roles, and then there's the fundamental role. The specific roles are things like father, brother, husband, or in my case, naval officer or shoemaker, whatever. You can choose some of them like a profession, and some of them choose you like family members and things like that. But either way, you have this role, and with it comes certain obligations. But there is also, above all of those, there is the fundamental role of a rational human being. And if any of those specific roles conflict with the fundamental role, then something is screwed up. Okay. So either you are misunderstanding the obligations attendant to that role, to that specific role, or that role is illegitimate. So like if my role is to be the guy that calls little old ladies and cons them out of their life insurance, that's probably a screwed up job, and I should probably get another one. you know. So the point is that there's no villain roles that are legitimate. Ideally, all the roles that we fulfill should be compatible, and in fact should reinforce one another. That is to say that fulfilling my various specific roles should be a virtuous thing to do, and should inhere virtue, should inhere being wise, courageous, just, and self-controlled in order to fulfill those roles. That hierarchy really sorts out a lot of problems. A good example is before I'd ever discovered the Stoics, my dad told me, hey, whenever I come into a conflict with what is doing my job, being a good teacher, he's a teacher, or being a good man, I go with being a good man, and the rest will sort itself out. And that has served me so well. And what I've discovered as being an officer, I've encountered situations where I think I'm conflicted. A good officer would do this, and a good man would do this other thing. Well, shoot, I'm going to be a good man, and I'll let the rest sort itself out. And then I would later discover that, you know what, the best officers do that, and that was the right move. And that basically maps onto the Epictetan concept of role ethics and the way that the Stoics basically figured it out logically, or mapped it out logically.
Yeah. Well, I just love the overlap on a core. A lot of guys, when they come into therapy, a lot of what's happened is they've gotten wrapped around a role to the detriment and destruction of the others. And so you see, I see this a lot with dads that are, they're the breadwinner, they're the person who's chasing down their career. And then all of a sudden their kid's 13 and their kid hates them, and they're very confused. Yeah. They're like, the kid has everything. He has no wants. I've done everything for him. Why does he hate me? Because he doesn't know you.
Yeah.
Right? You've been gone. And I think that a good life is having to pick between good things, right?
Yeah, I agree. That's a good problem to have.
Right? But a poorly aimed life is not recognizing you're making the choices and balancing your choices.
Yeah. Not at least calling it out.
Yeah. Well, and understanding that if you've got kids, you can't burn your kid's entire childhood on your career and expect to be connected to your kid.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So I love the roles ethics. I hadn't heard that. Like I remember coming across it in your book, but to be honest, I didn't understand it very well. So this was really nice.
Yeah. It's one of those things that's buried in the philosophy. And again, you won't really find much talk about that on the blogs, because people aren't looking for how do I be a good man. They're looking for how do I use Stoicism to
be effective.
Be effective and remain cool under pressure and all that. But kind of the point that I make is, why do you want to remain cool under pressure? Why do you want to be disciplined? It's because somewhere in your head you've got it you've got the idea that that's what you're supposed to be, and it's because it is. You are supposed to be disciplined. You're not necessarily supposed to apply that discipline to take advantage of someone or be a bastard in some way, but you are supposed to be brave. You are supposed to be disciplined and self-controlled. All those things are what an ideal man would be.
Well, and I think it's that self-control piece that so many guys get mixed up when they get into these things, is they think that a man controls. I am the king of my castle. I am in control of the world around me. And you literally cannot do that. Like, all you can do is manage yourself, manage your actions, and cruise through life as well as possible, knowing that. And I think that's where
You're lucky if you can do that. That's
right?
a hard thing to do.
Well, if you nail it more times than not, you're doing really well.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like you're talking about the blogs and the way that Stoicism gets misused is this idea of like, I'm going to be in control. And I'm going to leverage this to be in control of things. And nothing good happens in that framework. Leadership isn't control. Our second episode, I had my leadership instructor from my sergeant's course come on. And
Cool.
we've stayed pretty close. And the whole episode was basically us lamenting that when people think of military leadership from outside of the military, they think everybody's doing it like a drill instructor, instead of what the best military leaders are, which you just said, are good people doing hard things.
Yeah. And if you're not being a good person, you're going to screw it up
Every time.
you know? And I think that, again, the point is being a good person is pretty badass once you know what it is. And that's one of the points that I got, that talking about the intersection of rationality and virtue ethics is, and kind of brought it into alignment, is thinking I want to be all these awesome and high performing things. That really is what I was thinking is I want to manifest this being a badass thing. But why do I want that? Why do young military guys want to be fearless and formidable and unstoppable and all these things? Well, that's because, somewhere in their head, that's what they think a man should be. A man should be brave and a man should stand his ground whenever that's right, whenever he's standing on right and whenever he's correct.
Well, for me, that was the figuring out the distinction between fearless and brave. If you're fearless, you're probably not very bright. If you're brave, you're usually afraid while you're doing the hard thing.
Yeah, well, you can really only be brave if there's fear to overcome.
Yeah, no one likes the
And
guy that
if
doesn't
you're
have
totally
any fear.
fearless, you probably don't understand your situation.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that kind of leads to this question. I was trying to figure out how to frame some of these things, and I think we've kind of answered this question, but I want to make sure I've given you space for all your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And how Stoicism got turned into emotional armor instead of ethical armor, where the common vernacular for Stoicism is emotional containment, emotional discipline, instead of what the philosophy pushes for, which is how to be a good person, how to go through the world and protect your values and your ethics.
I want to be a badass. That emotional armor idea, that sounds pretty badass. So it sells. That's what gets the clicks. Kind of level 2 is realizing that being able to control yourself and being able to recognize and be rational and in light of whatever emotions you're experiencing, and to stop ruminating on stupid stuff and think about better stuff. All those things are part of rationality. All those things that you want that end up manifesting and becoming misrepresented as ice cold emotional control, that is ultimately derivative of virtue and discipline, self-control. That is what virtue leads to, done right.
Yeah, I think it's a big sticking point for a lot of the clinicians I train when we talk about working with guys. Is there's this idea of person-centered therapy where if you find your perfect self, you find perfect love and perfect acceptance. And that's a really, really powerful perfection to aim for, right? But I don't think that's the way most men need to come at their problems, because it's not of service, generally speaking. What I always go for is the idea that we need our armor, right? As a man in the world, you need to be able to move through it, and you need to be able to deal with the things that come at you in hard ways. but you also need space to take off the armor. You need people around you and people you do it for, people that help you be virtuous, people that help you be the man you want to be and feel held while you heal from whatever trials and tribulations you go through on the way. Instead of this idea that if we just get to this perfect moral and accepting self, everything lines up. In my experience, doesn't. It goes better the closer you are to it. But I've been perfect in moments. I certainly have not been perfect in minutes.
No. Well, it's a constant state of like any kind of morality is going to be a constant state of self-correction, just like any other continuous effort. Perfection is unreachable. and like, that's why it's called perfection. But recognizing that means that it's just like mastering a skill or getting a team to be high performing. If we're not getting better, we're getting worse. And so the continuous striving to improve oneself. But an important part of a lot of what you're talking about there, what you said, was about others and how others contribute to that and how we contribute to that for others. No man is an island, and we're meant for each other. And so trying to, I think it's the wrong approach to say like, well, I'm going to figure out myself first, and then I'm going to come out of my cave and be a part of everything else. Homie, you're never going to figure out yourself. Interacting with others is part of figuring yourself out. That's part of being a human and finding your place. But like we exist in a context, and it's a social context. And
yeah. Me and a buddy were laughing about that. We were on a walk with our dogs and talking about getting back to the gym after injuries. And the conversation's always, well, I need to go get some cardio in so that I can do the other workouts before I go back to the gym. And we both noted that that's how guys never make it to the gym.
That's an excuse.
Well, it's a barrier, and it's an arbitrary barrier, right? Rather than going to the gym to do the thing to get to the type of workout you want, instead of being worried about how you're seen at the gym when you show up, means you're unlikely to go. Same thing with what I see those guys that isolate, trying to figure themselves out, trying to get like, I want to be as strong, as disciplined, and effective as I can before I go and engage socially. They're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They're just like, until I get this, I won't be social. But you don't get to the social without just showing up.
Well, I think that a lot of people find, and you're more read in this stuff than I am in psychology things, but I think a lot of people really manifest whenever they find purpose, and it's usually going to be in a social context. And I think that they find that they perform better in kind of all the capacities that matter, whether that's in wisdom or that's in their physical self, and getting their act together in all these different ways is more natural whenever there's a purpose that they're contributing to somehow. And it's almost always going to be in a social context. It's certainly worked that way for me.
Well, and that's a big part of a lot of different modalities of therapy, is identifying your values to then be able to find your purposes. And I think that's where so many guys feel so lost, is they don't have their virtues dialed in. They don't know what it is that they want to frame their world around. And there's that balance, right? We get our values from the people that raised us, by the communities we're in, but we also shape our communities and the people we're around by holding our values.
Yeah.
And it's this entire like circular thing where they kind of need to be washed in the people that you're of service to, or they get really brittle.
Yeah,
one sideways blow
I can
breaks them.
imagine that. I can see how that would happen.
Well, I think that's what's happening with the popular versions of Stoicism, right? Is the emotional armor, the very hardened man is brittle.
Yeah.
He can get through a lot. He can truck through so many things, but the minute somebody taps that armor in the wrong place, he shatters.
Yeah, well, the brittleness is a good analogy there, and I'm an engineering nerd, so it brings me back to my materials science classes. But I think a lot of that also is just false expectations. They've been sold a bill of goods that I'm going to read Marcus Aurelius, and suddenly I'm going to be this Stockdale-like hard ass, and it turns out that I'm still a soft puppy inside, and I'm still sad when I get dumped, and I'm still craving all these silly things, and it turns out I'm a human being. Woe is me.
Well, I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've read it, but Weren't there quite a few times where Marcus Aurelius talked about his puppy nature?
I don't.
Like he wouldn't have framed it that way, but the softness of his social needs, his compassion for people, the frustrations, the anger, and things he had to put down, and how he put them down.
He's constantly lamenting his limitations and what the meditations are. And just for the audience, for anyone who's not familiar with Stoicism and wants to become familiar with Stoicism, I actually don't recommend Marcus Aurelius as an entry point, because some people are like, oh, wow, this is really wise. And then some people are like, wow, this is crap. As an entry point, I think that Donald Robertson's book, How to Think Like a Stoic Emperor, is a good spot if you're just not familiar with this stuff at all.
That's a good starting point.
Yeah, it's a good kind of survey and get you acquainted with the territory and where you're at. But just like if you just pick up meditations, a lot of people are like, "What is this?" You know? But yeah, he does, to answer your question. Yeah, he does lament his limitations constantly, because that's what he's doing. He's identifying. It's a psychological practice of identifying where you've gone wrong and calling it out. And writing forces you to engage with things in a way that just thinking about them doesn't.
Well, I love the recommendation on don't start with the deep thoughts of the founder of anything almost. Like if you're looking at mental health, getting into Freud's writings, that's a lot. And it doesn't, like without some modern context, it gets really weird really quick. And so there's better books to start with, just like you're talking about. I like I think you should talk to someone is a great, like, I don't know anything about mental health. It's a great little way in. And then if you're into it, right, then get into some of the deeper writings. But I like that acknowledgement that this thing that every guy who wants to be learned gets handed. Like, I don't know anybody who values Western intellect who hasn't been handed his memoirs as like the way to get this. And
it's not, honestly, like if I were to hand somebody something written, like we're limited and couldn't give someone a modern book and had to give them an ancient work of Stoicism, the Meditations would be the last one I would give you. There are 3 key Roman Stoic philosophers. So here's just basic 30 seconds on this. The Stoics, the original Stoics were Greeks. We really barely have any sources from the Greeks. What we have are hundreds of years after the Greeks, we had the Romans. Stoicism blew up in Rome, kind of like it's blown up here in ancient Rome. And you have 3 key Romans who wrote, or a lot was written of what they said. One of them is this guy named Seneca, who was a rich, powerful thinker who was just a beautiful writer and playwright and all that. And he just wrote tons of stuff. His stuff to me is the best like entry point because it's just nice to read and it's very thoughtful, and you can open it to any page and be like, damn, he's talking to me, But he wrote all these letters. The moral epistles of Seneca are just really good entry point. And there's a lot of really good wisdom in there. Epictetus came after Seneca. Epictetus is the man. He's like the key point, and he's kind of the most profound of the 3 thinkers there. Basically, he didn't write anything, but all of his lectures were recorded by somebody. And so the discourses of Epictetus are phenomenal, but he's kind of an asshole. He's kind of a drill sergeant, and he's fun to read. Once you kind of get to know him, he's funny, but a lot of people are like, man, this guy's a jerk. He's expecting too much. And then Marcus Aurelius is reading. He had Epictetus's discourses, and all of his journals that we have are him trying to live up to Epictetus's standard. So I would read Epictetus before I read Marcus Aurelius, but Epictetus wasn't in Gladiator, so you've got that.
Well, and Gladiator is one of the best films ever. Who doesn't love Russell Crowe just being hard? I didn't know that. And so I like a lot of the Stoic tools, and I like a lot of the frames from kind of a higher view, missing a lot. And so it sounds like I've got some reading to do, which is going to be fun now that I've got a little bit of aim. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So Donald Robertson is a psychotherapist, and he writes a lot about the connection between cognitive behavioral therapy and Stoicism. And that's kind of how he got into the Stoics, was from there. But the basic idea, and I'm going to butcher it, but the basic idea is that cognitive behavioral therapy was developed effectively in the 1950s, but the guys that developed it and rational emotive behavioral therapy were deeply read in the Stoics, and they basically adapted a lot of the practices of the Stoics into clinical practices. And it's not to say that cognitive behavioral therapists are just doing Stoicism. It's more like
This is the seed that it grew from.
yeah, and it's kind of like the difference between the ancient humans figured out that you could cure a headache by chewing on the bark of a willow tree. They had no idea why. Or, we understood winemaking long before we understood what fermentation was doing, what was happening, or like microbiology. But it worked, and they figured it out. And then now we know that the active ingredient of the bark of a willow tree is salicylic acid, which you can synthesize as aspirin. And so that's kind of like the way that analogizes, like, so that the way that ancient, what therapists consider constructive practices are just the way Stoics thought you should think about things. And that's part of the reason why a lot of people find it very therapeutic and very
and if
very
you read
helpful.
Beck's the guy who founded the theory, and it reads like a lot of the Stoic stuff.
Yeah, well, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's about how to bring some rationality into your behavior. It makes a lot of sense. And I think the modern use of mindfulness in clinical practice is very similar to how the Eastern values and philosophies bring forward mindfulness. It's just a functional distillation as opposed to a deeper spiritual journey with it.
Yeah.
And I think both are valid. Just, know what you're getting and where you're getting it. Don't conflate the two.
Yeah. And the Stoics had a mindfulness practice as well. It's not as central as like Zen Buddhists or something like that. And their word for it was prosochē or attention. But yeah, the idea of paying attention to what I'm thinking in the moment was kind of an active mindfulness. But the journaling piece that Marcus Aurelius doing is kind of meditation. It's an active, engagement with what I'm thinking and feeling and what I've been doing. And so there's a mindfulness aspect that the Stoics came to as well, just from a slightly different angle.
Yeah. What's that self-awareness, right? That's all it really means at its base level. So I want to be respectful of your time. I know the kids are waiting for dinner. So,
and we can do more. Like, if you want to do this again later, like I just enjoy talking about this stuff.
No, I appreciate it. The kind of two questions that I kind of want to end on, as far as the Stoic lessons, as opposed to getting to know you a little bit, you've talked a lot about the blogosphere and all the different ways that Stoicism is used to develop out effectiveness. If there was one Stoic tool that you wish the blogosphere would do better and get in front of more people, which one would it be?
I don't know if I want to call it a tool or a practice so much as a principle, but I think it is a very valuable principle, and it's the appeal to coherence as just what, eliminating cognitive dissonance and eliminating dissonance in thought and deed. And I think it's very well captured in Cicero. And Cicero is actually, he's a very, very important Roman political philosopher, very important to any kind of political theory today. But he also had a lot of important moral things to say, and he was very deeply into the Stoics, even though he did not claim to be a Stoic. But a lot of his philosophy is effectively Stoic. Cicero adapted something that Socrates said. Socrates said that for something, what is good? Trying to answer the question in a very Socrates style of just, he would always ask these questions that you're like, how are you even asking that? He would ask, what is the meaning of good? For Socrates, he'd say, for something to be good, it has to be both honorable and useful. So hundreds of years later, Cicero says, like Socrates said, something good needs to be honorable and useful. But we can intuit from that what is honorable is also useful. And the converse is true, that what is not honorable is not useful. And that is a very good test. Basically, the idea is, if I am going to get ahead in life in some way, I'm going to get something by some dishonorable act, then whatever I'm getting out of that is not going to be useful in the long run. I'm biting myself in the ass. And that is true whether I'm trying to run a business, trying to run an organization, trying to run myself, my life. What is honorable is inherently useful. And what is not honorable is inherently unuseful or counterproductive in some way. It is going to, if you zoom out far enough, I'm going to regret that dishonorable act.
Yeah.
So I think that that is a very good way of thinking about things and sorting out
So essentially,
reality.
it's the exact opposite and counter argument to the ends justify the means, where
It is
if
exactly the counter to that.
if
Yes.
you do not feel good about how you got somewhere, you are not going to enjoy being there.
Yeah.
There's going to be that
Whatever
dissonance
the end is not what you actually want. It's not actually worth it.
every time. So many guys come in for clinical work, and that dissidence is exactly where their clinical work goes. Is they've got an idea from when they were young about what they needed to do to be safe, happy, and connected, and they just ignored every other aspect on the way there, get it, and then are none of those things
Yeah.
because of all the things that had to be sacrificed to get there. And so I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful thing to bring forward. So your book is incredibly academic and a very good deep dive into Stoicism for those who are already educated on it. You've given us some primer books to get into. If people are looking for your work, where's the best place for them to find it?
So I have a website. So just basically what I write about for not all of your readers are military or veterans, but I am active military. So most of the stuff that I'm writing is somehow oriented to the military. But if you are in the military or adjacent to it, you might find interest in it. I have a website, williamcspears.com. And, there's articles and essays and stuff I hang there. And it's also just kind of a funnel to the book. My book is called Stoicism as a Warrior Philosophy, and it is releasing here in a couple weeks.
I'm excited for people to get to see it. It's chewy. It's chewy, but it's good.
It was basically me answering the question of okay, how do I approach Stoicism from a military perspective? And let's follow this rabbit hole all the way down to the bottom and see what the reference actually says, because that's I'm a submarine officer, and that's how submariners look at things. And we say, what does the book actually say? Your opinion's going to be fascinating after you bring me the tech manual.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, okay, well, let's see what the tech manual says about Stoicism and specifically with relevance to military service. But I would say if you've read Donald Robertson or something, some of the blogs, and you say, okay, I got it, I want to get deeper, then that's probably someone who this book would be appropriate for.
That's great. I do like an author coming on and saying, this is who the book is for. It's not for everybody. And I think that's a much better way to have people not be disappointed by the experience of what they're reading, and the acceptance of it is just, that's how we expand human knowledge, right? We've got to start with the basics, but as you go further, where things get interesting for what you're into, it gets chewy.
Yeah, and what I ultimately want is for people to find stuff that's useful and helpful for them. Like, here's a hint for you: authors don't make any money
100%.
on selling books.
100%.
So it's about getting ideas out there.
Well, so I'm going to be interested to hear how the personal questions go for you, because just from your writing and the preface in the book and talking about your father and what a good man is, I imagine a lot of your lessons in masculinity are going to be intrinsically tied to the frame of Stoicism, as that's been such a big part of your life. And to kind of get that going, what's a lesson that you learned about manhood before you were 12 that's remained true today?
Well, observing my father, I came to the conclusion early on that whatever else, a man does his job. And if you accept that as kind of an anchor point, you say a man does his job, and then you realize, well, what is his job? That's the point. You can spend your whole life stewing on that and trying to figure out what your job actually is. But you better damn well do it. and that I think has been always true. And that really ties into the role ethics and the role ethics piece of it helps a lot with that.
Yeah, the acceptance of a man's job is multifaceted.
Oh yeah,
it's not just
a man's going to have a lot of jobs.
At least if he's living a good life, right? Like we talked about before, it's that I've got too many good things and hard things to pick from.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I really like the frame of it as the men do the job. Like, because I imagine our fathers are of an age, and that was also within my father and how he explained things. What's a time that pursuit of your manhood hurt you?
well as all times whenever I'd misunderstood what it meant. When I was a young college guy, I really thought that it was important to hook up with girls at parties and stuff like that. And thankfully, I wasn't very good at that. But there was a lot of frustration that came from not being very good at that. And I'm just really glad that that wasn't a big part of my experience. But at the time, I really felt like I was missing out on a lot, and that I was just not fulfilling. I was not being the cool guy that cool guys are supposed to be, or whatever, which that was just really foolish. And now I'm very happily married, and my wife and kids are upstairs, waiting on on me to come up so we can eat, but it's I have a very wonderful life because I was wrong, and it turned out that I was not good at things that I didn't need to be good at. And on a lighter note, I spent a lot of time trying to play golf and trying to figure out why everyone else enjoys it when I just hate it.
It's because golf is a frustrating game.
That just sucks. I just don't like it. And then eventually I reached an age and said, you know what? I don't like this. I'm not going to do it anymore. Yeah, I don't have to do this.
Yeah, that has come up with a lot of guys when they're younger, and the idea that a man pursues women and is successful with women can be incredibly painful for a lot of guys. And
it's like this measure of worth or something. Like, come on.
It's a thing you can do. How you do it matters. Yeah. And, we always like to go out on a high note. What's a time where your masculinity empowered you?
I think that nothing has made me ever feel more masculine than being a father. And whenever I can say, any time that I can say, man, I just handled that well. That was some good dad stuff there. And just hanging out with my kids and just being around them. I don't have a specific anecdote for you there, but I will say the role of being a father is far and above, my most important and rewarding role. And I have some important and rewarding roles, and I have some important jobs, and none of them are even close to being a father, because those other jobs I will be replaced in a microsecond if I don't show up. But if I don't show up to being a father, like no one else is, then there's no cavalry coming, And so it is far and above my most important job, but also like it's the only thing that's going to matter in the long run, because at someday I'm going to be worm food, and someday soon, and they're what's going to be left of me.
I think that really lines up with how you've described your father being so key into the man you are, and the frame of your masculinity being so tied to his lessons for you. Passing them on to the next generation has got to be a wonderfully powerful thing for you.
Yeah, and I only hope that I do. And there's a lot of, with kids, there's this isn't a dad podcast, but gosh, there's a lot of powerlessness and recognizing that, man, I have no control over what this person becomes. All I can do is be a good example. And you gotta have more than one kid to really recognize the degree to which they're just little insane balls of chaos that are going to be whatever they're going to be.
It's about just giving them a channel for the chaos, hopefully, if we do it right.
Yeah.
Well, I can't appreciate enough you coming on, and particularly coming on a bit of short notice. I'm really hopeful for your book, and I can't wait to stay connected with you to see where your career goes, just generally speaking.
Yeah, man, let's stay in touch. Like, I've enjoyed this, and I would love to come on again, and or not come on and just BS about this stuff, because I've enjoyed this, and I hope that you're very successful and how all this goes as well. I think that your podcast, I've listened to a few of your episodes, and I think that you've got a very positive message. And
that's very kind. Thank you.
I hope that it can do some good in the world. One of the things that, one of the kind of philosophical points that it really dawned on me over the course of the writing endeavor is when you're going to put ideas into the world, that's a massive responsibility. And, the human being, if I do so much as eat a cheeseburger, I am altered in some way. But that's not nearly as profound as the alteration is when I interact with knowledge. And so the question is, whenever you interact with a certain type of knowledge, or if you're going to put knowledge into the world, you're going to put some information in the world, whether you want to call it knowledge or not. If you're going to put information in the world, when people interact with it, they're going to be altered. So are they altered in a good way or not? And I think if you're gonna contribute to that, that's a huge responsibility, because you're altering other people, and they're going to alter other people as well.
Definitely felt that on the journey in getting these things out. Like we were talking about before we recorded, being a clinician for 10 years, I'm really good at helping a person find what they need to find within themselves and give them what they need to be who they want to be. And figuring out how to distill that and give that to the people listening has been nerve-wracking, trying to make sure that it's done right. So I appreciate the pointing out of the responsibility of putting thoughts into the world in productive ways. It's important, and I wish more people took it seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can do our part.
There we go. That's all we can do.
Yeah.
And that's our conversation with Commander Spears. We started with a question. Where's somewhere you're overusing armor and underusing awareness? What's one thing you're going to do differently this week? If you're able, share it in the comments and help some other guys find their answers too. If it's worth a comment, please take a moment and subscribe and help us bring these conversations and help more men get better. And as always, we'd like to fact check. Nothing critically wrong in this episode, but there were two things worth adding some nuance to. CBT is an evidence-based therapy that's been rigorously researched over the last few decades. While Ellis and Beck, the founders of it, were certainly inspired by Stoicism, it's important to acknowledge that this isn't just a repackaging of Stoicism. And it's important to acknowledge that Stoicism got its start in Athens in 300 BC with Zeno, and then later got adopted by Rome and widely used by the soldiers. You can find our full source list on the show notes on our website. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time when we talk about men's health and testosterone.